I want to start by talking about one of my favorite exercises in modern media punditry. One of the great things about the internet is that anyone with a microphone or a website can create a piece of just fantastic media, compelling media with a compelling opinion that's really, really fascinating, and that can bring us together to at least think about things that in a way that we don't typically think about things. And I think one of the ways that that this has happened is in the media bias chart. Media bias chart is a chart that's created by a patent attorney. I believe her name is Vanessa Otero. I can check that there. But Vanessa Otero, she's this patent attorney in Colorado, and in her spare time, she analyzes media. You know, she's a woman after my own heart. And what she does here is based on a series of analysis of the content on each media site. She grades everyone from the guests, the type of guests, the posture of the guests, various elements of the media, and she comes up with a score, and then she charts it on a literal chart. And it's a fascinating one. It's one that's evolved over the years. And just a few weeks ago, Miss Otero came up with a new chart. And every time this chart comes out, I find myself staring at it, just gawking at it, and feeling like I need to talk about this and share it with the world. And you know, that's why I'm here. I'll let this out. I consume a crazy amount of media, and I feel like I can grade this as well as Vanessa can. And when I look at this chart, I see a lot of very, very, very interesting choices, I guess I would say. And for those of you who are only listening, think of the chart as a giant box. On the left side, you see the farthest left, you know, most extreme left is the farthest box. Then across the top, you have the hyper-partisan left, the skews left, neutral is in the middle, skews right, hyper-partisan right, most extreme right. And on the left-hand side, the boxes that go horizontally is original fact reporting is graded up top. Fact reporting is second. Complex analysis or mix of facts reporting and analysis. Pure analysis. Fair persuasion. By the way, that's the most interesting of all of the areas on this chart. The fair persuasion area. I have a lot of things to say about that. Selective or incomplete story or unfair persuasion. That's also a very interesting one. Propaganda, meaning something that contains misleading info. That's an interesting one in a different way. So, like, if you have any info that's misleading at all, you're considered propaganda. So, I would argue that a lot of people who are higher up on this list have some level of misleading info in them, and you could, by that metric, you could call them all propaganda. And at the very bottom of the barrel, you have contains inaccurate or fabricated info. And there's also another layer to this. There's a key that says green is considered news. Everything within the green box is considered news. The yellow box is considered fair interpretation of news, which I found that kind of interesting. That's where the bulk of the content and outlets on this entire chart are. The orange rectangles are extreme and unfair interpretations of the news. There's a few in there. Most of the ones that are in those orange boxes are sort of halfway in, halfway out. In the red rectangle is the bottom of the barrel. She calls them nonsense, damaging to public discourse. It's an interesting place to start. I guess I'll start at the top and I'll work my way down to InfoWars, because InfoWars is at the very bottom, along with Patriot Biotics, which I actually haven't heard of. I've heard of just about everyone else, but I haven't heard of Patriot Biotics. That's it's fabricated info, but extremely left-leaning. I'll have to check out that site. But I'll start at the top. The AP is up top. It's the king of the hill. It's considered, along with Reuters and Bloomberg, pretty neutral, right in the middle. C-SPAN right there. I can't really argue with most of that. My first quibble comes with NPR and PBS, and I say this as an NPR listener. It skews pretty left. And it is on the left side of the aisle here, but I think it skews further left than it's appearing on this chart. It's sort of toward the middle of the chart, but I think it deserves to be closer to the hyperpartisan left. Maybe center skews left instead of more neutral. And when I point out that NPR is lefty, it's not so much that that they are simply overwhelmingly left. They are they have their own. I mean, for them, it's more the vibe in the choices and how they approach topics that shows off their left persona than the reporting itself. It's not entirely. It's as we get lower into this chart, you see that the analysis, the mix of reporting and analysis, is what sort of skews most of these. And I think NPR belongs more in that category because there's a ton of analysis on NPR. And there's a ton of point of view journalism on NPR, even if that's not what they're calling it. When you approach things adversarially from a relatively consistently left perspective, it's pretty adversarial, and there's a level of analysis without actual pure outwardly saying that it's analysis, is what I'm saying here. And that cluster is also really interesting. You have CBS News a little bit further to the right, which is I would not have guessed that. You have ABC and NBC News. NBC News is considered separate than MSNBC, which is much lower on this list. And it's considered in the same rough cluster with The Hill, which is surprising. Even though The Hill is in the skews right corner, it's not considered. It's considered factual reporting, just leaning right. I guess you can make that argument. I think The Hill, even though I would agree that it's a conservative outlet, I think of it more like I think of the Wall Street Journal, which is also skewing toward the right. I think they're not entirely neutral. I guess I can't quite totally move them off that square, but I'd move them a smidge over into the neutral category. I do think there's definitely a right wing point of view there, but I don't think they're like the equivalent of something like BuzzFeed or the Washington Post. Washington Post in particular needs to be further. I mean, democracy dies in darkness. Look, I'm not saying you're totally wrong. I'm just saying you've clearly picked a side, and you are not skewing left. You're in the hyper-partisan left when you decide that democracy dies in darkness because someone who you disagree with is president. So, also, interesting, the Skimm. I've never actually read the Skimm. I know it's an email newsletter. I don't think they do original reporting in the Skimm. At least that's not what I've heard. I've heard that it's more... they find popular stories and they rewrite up popular stories. So I find it kind of strange that they're in this cluster. Also, ProPublica, I generally think ProPublica is pretty neutral. I'm not seeing the bias there that most people see, or at least Miss Otero sees here. I would think ProPublica would be more in this center cluster. And I'm going to move over to the left here. You see a cluster in the borderlands between fact reporting and complex between news and fair interpretations of the news, only hyper-partisan left. I'm not sure I would put The Intercept there. I think they're more skewing left than they are hyper-partisan left. I'd say the same thing about Democracy Now! The Slate is hyper-partisan left, without question. I think, honestly, I think... I would put WAPO and Slate in the same universe. And I put Vox in that universe also. Vice, surprisingly, does not scream left. It's not hyper-partisan left. I do think it leans left. I don't think it's hyper-partisan. Mike is extreme left. Mike is more left than Mother Jones or Free Speech TV. And they don't do any reporting at all, so I think it's in a fair box. I don't even know that I would call it analysis. I would just call it straight up opinion and left. I mean, it's more in the TYT country, which is a little bit lower here and lower than MSNBC. Now, I find MSNBC's placement here very curious. I do call it hyperpartisan. I think hyperpartisan left is a fair placement, but there is original reporting. Are they attributing the original reporting to NBC News? That would be the question that I would have for the creators of this chart. Maybe they're thinking that the original reporting on MSNBC is more attached to NBC News. It's hard to untangle the two. And I think overall, I would probably have them in the skews left lane, splitting the child in half. Also, CNN is skewing left, but it's sort of right on the borderline between skewing left and neutral. I wish there was a way to say that they're just really bad at news. Because they do a lot of original reporting on CNN. I think you could easily claim that they skew left. I think I would move them higher and a little bit further left. So in the Vice News, Think Progress, Vox lane here, I would move CNN up there. I wouldn't necessarily call them just analysis. I think that it's you got to give them a bit more credit for their news gathering than we're getting here. So also you have HuffPo, which is an interesting case also. They do a fair amount of original reporting on HuffPo also, so I think I would probably slide that up also into the complex analysis or mix of fact reporting in analysis quadrant here. I think TYT should be a bit lower in that they're very selective with the stories and how they approach the stories that they talk about on the TYT network. And I think that's in the unfair persuasion category. I think I'd put Mike in that category also. I think Mike is super selective and super skewing and twisting and turning facts to fit their perspective. I think the difference between TYT and Mike and Alternet, it's hard to tell the difference. I think that Daily Kos and Alternet are in the right spot. I don't read Won't Get. I used to way back in the day, but I haven't read it recently. I'm not sure what to say about Won't Get, but they have it in a propaganda category, which is really interesting. But in the propaganda category, it's more interesting on the right because they have the Conservative Tribune, the Daily Caller, which I'm not a fan of, the Blaze, which is, I think that's a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily call the Blaze propaganda. I would call the Blaze selective. I'd have them in the category that I would put Mike. They have a point of view, and they're hammering home their point of view, Glenn Beck. And I don't think, I wouldn't call it propaganda. That seems a bit too strong. And especially if you're not going to call Fox News propaganda, I wouldn't call the Blaze propaganda either. Breitbart's definitely propaganda. In the bottom of the barrel here, you have the Inquirer, who's propaganda, but more central, more neutral, skewing right wing, but more toward the center. WorldTruth.tv is something that I haven't ever logged on to. I think I'm going to try it after this just to see what the hell is on there. And you know what? I'm going to try that right now. What's on the front page of WorldTruth.tv? And look at this quarter. You had a WorldNet Daily, which is a rag. You have InfoWars. I don't look at InfoWars as fabricated. I wouldn't call it. Generally, I don't watch a lot of the other programming on InfoWars. From time to time, I'll watch some Alex Jones. With Alex, there's a kernel of truth that he's taking into outer space. So with I would say that it's an extreme interpretation of the news more than straight up nonsense. WorldNet Daily is generally straight up nonsense. I'd say that Alex deserves a little bit of a higher respectability rate than WorldNet Daily. There's definitely issues with them all. WorldTruth.tv is taking a long time to load. Oh, okay. There we are. Okay. So these are it looks like the top 5 stories on WorldTruth.tv. 50 African children paralyzed after receiving Bill Gates backed meningitis vaccine. Remember the man who refused to salute Hitler? These were the consequences. Scientists reviewed all blue-eyed people have this one bizarre thing in common. And study finds that alcohol is worse for mental health than psychedelics. This is strange. Wow, this is a weird corner of the universe. Okay, there's 2 Bill Gates stories on the front page. Bill Gates announces microchip for population control. Bitcoin is an Illuminati scam that could cause you to lose. Woman claims she is the daughter of Marilyn Monroe and JFK. This is a desert, but once a year it turns ... Wow. This is strange. Okay. Odd. But I do find that it is always interesting to go into that, weird corner of the universe to sort of get some sort of sense of what's going on there. And the 1.5 million Facebook likes for that page says that, there's certainly a chunk of the population who are totally into it and honestly think that they found Marilyn Monroe and JFK's love child. So when you move a little bit higher on this list, you see Fox News and OAN and Daily Wire in the same quadrant of extreme and unfair interpretations of the news. I generally hate the Daily Wire. I guess maybe I think I wouldn't call them propaganda, but I do think that's probably in the right spot. Fox. At this point with Fox, they're so predictable about what they're having their outrage about that I don't spend a ton of time thinking about them. Even when I'll watch a Tucker Carlson segment. By the way, I watched a great one. I don't know if you look at that Stormy Daniels lawyer segment was one for the books, and I'm definitely gonna do a piece on that one because that was a fascinating exercise in how a media producer can just straight up obliterate somebody without saying a word negative about that person. But I find it strange that Fox in particular is below the Federalist. I would say the Federalist and like Newsmax are in the propaganda category, and or at minimum selective or incomplete storytelling. I would say that Fox is a better news outlet than Washington Times, probably the Examiner, and definitely Newsmax. I would say that Fox, they're certainly extreme, but I'd probably have them a step or two up here. I'd have them in the relatively fair persuasion, on the edge of extreme. Like they often go into outer space whenever I see clips from them. And they totally live in their own bubble, but I'm not sure they live in their own bubble any more than a place like MSNBC does. So I I would have them around the same tier. I don't think they're equivalents. I think that MSNBC's choices are financial, and I think the Fox choices are a bit more conspiratorial. It doesn't quite say it, but they're a bit more political. While I think MSNBC is just simply chasing ratings. When I look a little bit higher, I'm surprised to see Drudge given, credence as pure news, and sort of in the analysis, in the as a fair interpretation of news. I'm not sure I would have Drudge there. I'd also call it hyperpartisan right or extreme right. I think Reason, I wouldn't call Reason right wing. I actually read Reason a fair amount. They hate the Republicans too. It's the one thing about the libertarian critique that I do dig is that they hate everybody. They absolutely loathe everyone, and I dig that about you, man. And I think that I would probably slide Reason a bit further toward the neutral, but not entirely neutral. I could see how how elements of it would feel right wing, but I'm not sure I would call it, I wouldn't put it in Weekly Standard land, or in this case, they put it in National Review and Newsmax are in its cluster, and I think that's certainly overstepping it. And thinking about that cluster there, I'd also move Wall Street Journal. I know they do a fair amount of fact-based reporting. I think I'd move them a bit lower. Because they do a lot of original reporting, but I would certainly put them a bit lower in the sort of in the skews right category. But the complex, the mix of fact and reporting, I'd move it lower. The strangest placement of all here seems to be Time, which is a straight up rag. And at this point, it's a clickbait farm, and it's really, I don't think it has any credence, and I haven't seen anything that is driven by anything substantive from it in a very, very long time. I think I would move it down into the analysis, or even fair persuasion seems a little bit strong for it. I think I'd have it around the selective, incomplete, and skewing left, sort of below CNN, where they have CNN, sort of in TYT country. I don't. Time is pretty awful, and the amount of times where I've clicked on an article from Time and looked at it and said, this makes zero sense, or this has already been debunked. What the hell is it? It's pretty crazy. I think time is awful, and I think I would move that down there. So for now, keep your knees loose, and a good night.